I've got 10:30, so it is time for us to transition now into class time. So, Courtney, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, I just can't tell you how good it does my heart to see all of you.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a blessing. Hi, Betsy.
Betsy.
Hey, Betsy.
Hi, Courtney.
Hi, David. Hi, Ann.
Hi.
Yeah. And
Um,
Ron.
Do you
I'd
want us to mute ourselves?
Unless you've got background noise, I don't think you need to, but you're certainly welcome to. I'll do a little bit of talking. We'll have a video, and then we'll have a group discussion. It really is heartwarming to be together, and so it's so important. It's been tough.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to switch to the PowerPoint. So I may not be able to see all of you, but I think there are gallery views or something that we can figure that out. But I'm going to switch to a PowerPoint now, and I'm going to share my screen. I'd like to start by thanking Mary Kaiser, who originally came up with the Ray Suarez content through the Next Church organization that's a part of the Episcopal Church USA. So thank you, Mary. And this has taken a few months to come to fruition, but good things take time, as we know. We've been traveling through some very challenging times collectively with the pandemic, with political disturbances, and just everybody has personal matters on top of that. We wanted to provide an opportunity to discuss civil discourse and some of what we've been experiencing, and do it in a very positive and constructive manner. This course is a safe zone. I want everyone to feel free to express your thoughts without any kind of fear of what other people will think or what other people will say, because we are a church family. And if you can't talk to your family, who can you talk to? And I think it's important for us to be able to talk about these kinds of things, because part of when we don't, there's more isolation and more problems that are compounded because of that. As a reminder, we'll be having 4 classes. The first one is today, and then next week, the next 3 weeks after that. And then recordings will be posted to the St. Stephen's YouTube channel. In this 4-lecture class, Ray Suarez discusses an approach in which we can stand for our principles and use our energy to work towards a more just world. And these are his words, without tearing each other apart. I really was kind of concerned about using that harsh a description, but I couldn't think of how to change that. In this first lesson, which is today, the challenge of civility, we'll talk about how social and political discourse in America has kind of descended in terms of how it's done. In lesson 2, we'll talk about scripture and civility and the scriptural basis for treating one another with civility. In lesson 3, we'll talk about what civility might look like, methods which we can deploy or employ to avoid villainizing one another, and ways to compromise productively on important issues without backing down in the face of injustice or giving into oppression. And in lesson 4, we'll talk about how we can find our own personal way of manifesting our faith in word and action, and promote civility. And then as a group, we'll kind of synthesize this information and examine where God may be leading us, both individually and collectively. A little bit about Ray Suarez. He is a renowned journalist and author, as well as a lifelong Episcopalian. He was a senior correspondent for PBS NewsHour for many years and hosted the show America Abroad. He currently co-hosts that show and many podcasts, and he's got a new book, The Holy Vote: Politics of Faith in America. I'd like to open this with a prayer. And this is the prayer for the human family found in our prayer book. Oh God, you have made us in your own image and redeemed us through Jesus, your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred which infect our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us. Unite us in bonds of love, and work through our struggle and confusion to accomplish your purposes on earth, that in your good time, all nations and races may serve you in harmony around your heavenly throne. through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The course overview, the 4 classes we have. Any questions about the class or how we're going to do things before we get into the video? In this video, Mr. Suarez uses the word comity. When I first listened, I thought I heard comedy, and I looked up the definition, and comity is courtesy and considerate behavior towards others.
Why are we uncivil? How did we get this way? Well, that's a great big question. The flavor of our politics, the tone, the understanding that all these things are undergirded by a set of rules that bind us to each other, and that binds act as a disincentive to incivility, well, that's all been severely tested in recent decades. If you look at how congressional leaders, elected officials, presidents talked about the job, talked about each other, talked about their responsibilities in 1980, even 1990, the changes have been breathtaking. The hostility, the language used, the demonization of opponents, it's all carried on in a way leaders and the led of recent generations would find remarkable and more than a little disturbing. But this shouldn't blind us to the fact that the kind of comedy and settled practices of post-World War II decades were not the continuation of a long settled tradition in American politics. It was only a breather after the tempestuous politics of the previous 150 years, where civility and comedy and genteel manners were sometimes the rule, and often enough not. But since everybody listening to this course wasn't around during the battles over slavery or Indian displacement or genocide, let's concentrate on more immediate concerns. When the post-war consensus began to fade and the unifying external enemies of the Cold War no longer forced us into each other's arms, it was a pretty evenly divided country. So what crept into our politics? An idea that your opponent was your enemy, that incremental steps toward a long-term goal were not preferable to long-term war to get everything you want, that compromise was for losers, using culture as a weapon, as a sorting mechanism in working out our long-term goals because politics couldn't really do it anymore, became the tool of the day, and the use of language as a cudgel upped the ante in the already existing normal tug of war of our politics. It pushed away the idea that civility was even a goal. We were told the stakes were so high and the people on the other side so bad that getting along with them while opposing them in the arena was something not to be desired, that we no longer had to treat them well because they were just so awful. Republican pollster and consultant Frank Luntz was commissioned by Newt Gingrich to come up with language that moved the electorate, to test words that were hot and high impact. Gingrich unveiled that messaging at a series of meetings with incumbents and candidates just before the 1994 midterm season began, and the disciplined troops of the Gingrich Revolution rode this new approach to victory, giving the 104th Congress the first Republican speaker in 42 years. The Republicans came to Washington calling their Democratic opponents sick and decadent. They called Bill and Hillary Clinton counterculture McGovernicks and the enemies of normal people. The breach, reflecting splits and tears in the country that were already there, only got worse as war and recession and Supreme Court cases both heightened the contrast between the two sides and removed some of the bumpers, the guardrails that kept the tone of American politics at least somewhat restrained. And dark money, an endless river of cash to independent committees, meant that they were no longer restrained by authorized association with a particular candidate. Even in paid advertising, you could say anything about anybody almost no holds barred, and religion played a part in all of this too. The equilibrium, the desire for a kind of publicly demonstrated rectitude on the part of the mainline denominations and the Catholic Church had given the society a kind of cultural thermostat. And when that sober, sort of National Council of Churches approved tone lost its cultural primacy, it gave way to something a lot harder and a lot hotter. From the pulpit, preachers could tell their flocks that public officials didn't care about the deaths of babies, in fact, wanted them dead, that public officials desired the exile of God from all of shared civic life and wanted to push God entirely out of America. It was a reminder that we were now in an anything goes era, with closely divided politics, with winner-take-all struggles over issues. It is both essential that we try to remain one people while we struggle over our differences, and it's understandable that we've gotten this way. Both things are true, and the stakes are seen as being so high that no point can be conceded, no quarter can be given, and no accusation, no slander is too out of line to lob at your opponents.
Let's talk for a minute about what you heard, about what we heard, about the idea that civility has been pushed away as a goal, about being told the other side is awful, about weaponizing language, about religious institutions losing primacy as a cultural thermostat. Any comments on that?
I think that first bit about the goal, that's very interesting. Yeah, that's I guess we've whoever has set up that goal of non-comity, they've succeeded, or we've succeeded at that. My thought, whenever I look back to the era of the 1990, give or take, I think he sort of makes the point that Cold War, we had a common enemy, the common devil. And once the Soviet Union collapsed, it was easy to find some other devil, or we needed another devil or two to look at. And we just reimagined.
We turned it inward, didn't we?
Yes.
I'm also noticing the same thing in a way, but in my own experience in my life. It used to be years ago that I could sit down with anybody and talk politics with any classmates or whatnot. And I remember that we're still friends. Nowadays, I could find much of anyone to talk politics with who's on the opposing side without getting slammed.
So it's filtered into social relationships and not just on political topics. I think that this lack of comity. Thank you for sharing that. I really see that as well, Teddy, and that the perpetuation of conspiracy theories and people, for example, saying that the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting was a hoax, and where the conspiracy theorists challenged parents who lost children and people who lost brothers and sisters in that school shooting, and threatened them. The conspirators threatened them. This whole lack of respect for each other and uncivility goes a lot more than in political discourse. I put some questions down for us to reflect on. And the first is, how do you, I guess we've really started with number 2. So let's continue on that, and then we'll go on back to number 1. Have we experienced a decline in comity? And And comity again is defined as courtesy and considerate behavior towards others. And how has this affected our social and political interactions?
I think one factor that was never mentioned in this was social networking on the web. It's a large part. You can now attack people anonymously. And this has gotten more and more a problem.
So social media as a platform and a weapon.
Yes.
Yeah, the misuse of social media.
Well, that's also a matter of opinion. I mean, what I think is misuse, you may not. So I think it's indicative of the issue.
Like Joe's noting that the anonymity of social media. I mean, I can sit here and be drunk or whatever, or, and be nasty all day long, But anonymity of social media has really helped make these hot buttons that Ray Suarez talked about even hotter.
I think one of the more alarming things he said that I heard was the fact that he started with Newt Gingrich, but it covers a lot of ground with others too. The idea that some of these things have been sort of manufactured and put out there. And you just wonder where all this stuff comes from, the QAnon and all that 50% of our country would believe something coming from an anonymous source is terrifying. And I don't know how you stop that. I mean, certainly everybody's talking about the problem, but the idea that this isn't just a happenstance or a reaction, but that people are actually purposely putting together talking points to move people in one direction or the other. Certainly not anything new, but the type of information that's out there in those forums is alarming. They were talking about the anti-vacciner folks this morning, saying that one of the things is a lot of that information is coming from the companies that make alternate treatments for COVID or whatever, and that the majority of that information is coming from a set of about 8 or 10 folks that project to the whole country and turn people against vaccines. I don't know how you fight that.
We'll touch a little bit about how to fight that today, but the next few weeks we'll talk even more depth about how to do that.
I think people choose to be in a group that affirms what they already tend to believe. And so they start reading and listening to the things that make them feel comfortable and confirm what they already tend to believe. And it's very difficult to get to talk in this situation with people. I had a conversation with the woman who cuts my hair. She did not want to wear a mask. So this was back in September. And she said, I just think things are going pretty well. I don't think masks make a difference. And I said, but this was at the time when COVID infection was increasing a lot. And I said, but a lot more people are winding up in the hospital and even in intensive care units. And she said, well, I feel as though if God wants to take me, he'll decide and he'll take me. Now, I could have gone on and said, I think God really loves us and wants us to take care of ourselves. But I knew that she was cutting my hair, and goodness knows if she got very hostile, what might have happened. Okay? So, but, that really amazed me that she said that. That if he wants to, he can take me. I'm ready. And
it seems as though people want easy and simple answers, that we live in a complex world and black and white, lots of gray areas.
Oh, I know.
And people just really want easy.
And not only that, but I think going with apparent decline in comity is also a lack of consideration. That's something we have to guard against.
Yeah, Mary Ellen, your hairstylist didn't talk about the impact on other people from her not wearing a mask. She only thought about it in terms of impact to herself.
Yeah. It was, she said it's just uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But I did ask her to wear one. So.
I noticed that me only perspective of the whole conversation, and your hair cutter isn't the only one with that perspective. I keep running into that viewpoint everywhere, so it's not an isolated thing.
No, it's not.
And I would further that to say that a nation of individuals who are concerned only about themselves is kind of a fallen nation. And I hate to say that, but I don't want us to become that. But that encounter suggests the concern.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, David, you're so right. That's what we've just seen, a sort of a pendulum swing. It's concerning. I'm thinking, a year ago, and people saying, "Oh, social media is getting me down, and I'm going to give up Facebook for Lent." And I think I personally know about 6 people who said that they were going to give up Facebook for Lent. Then came the pandemic, and people realized that they needed the connection and their social networks. And I think probably come Easter, to my knowledge, out of those 6, there was only 1 left who was not back on Facebook. And it's a sort of love-hate relationship with social media. You want contact, but then there's so much that you want to be able to ignore.
I'll tell you a way that, that it's also crept into the church. I would say it's crept. It's very much in the church. And talking about civility and how social media, depending on your perspective, proper uses and not of it. I had in my previous parish, my deacon happened to be preaching that Sunday, and her sermon was good. There was nothing that I deemed to be anything quote unquote controversial in it. But one of our parishioners, who at the time was a very good friend of mine, very diametrically opposed in some views to me, but we could take breakfast together. We were good friends. Piped on Facebook and said, having brunch after church, trying to get over that god-awful sermon, and then a couple of other comments that he made. And of course, and then the thing is then I get 15 messages from people in the church, a couple of whom are like, "Was your sermon that bad this morning?" I said, "Well, no." And actually, if it was directed at me, I would have handled it a little differently. But I was somewhat upset because of how he had addressed our deacon, and also how he had just that was his way of expressing displeasure with that. So we met the next day, and I told him, I said, "I think this is highly inappropriate. And while I'm not the Facebook police, I don't go around looking for stuff." I said, when people's drawn to my attention and I see something that's inappropriate that wears the fabric of the community, then I'm going to say something about it. And before I could get any further, he looked at me and he said, "I have the right to say whatever I want on Facebook, especially if I have to sit there and be a prisoner to whatever stuff I don't happen to agree with from the pulpit that day." And that statement right there. And unfortunately, he left the church. He and his whole family left the church a week after this conversation. We pretty much lost contact because he was mad at me, quote, for taking her side on this. And I'm like, this was somebody that, despite disagreements, we got along and did things together. And within a week, this whole thing was destroyed. And it all came to the fact of, I have the right to say whatever I want, whatever the consequences are, because it's my freedom of speech to say it. And unfortunately, this is not the only time I've experienced this. Certainly, I've experienced it plenty of places outside the church, but I've experienced it at places inside the church too. And it's very difficult to deal with. Because as somebody said, I think, David, you said it well about if we're a nation, or I would plug in the word church, substitute, if we're a nation or church, people who in it for ourselves, then exactly, we are a fallen country or we are a fallen church. And that's, unfortunately, more and more of that's common.
There seems to be in a large number of people, and I've seen this in other places. I lived in California, and there was something comparable to this. It is a confusion between rights and what's good. In other words, there's a presumption among too many people, and I think this is the case when one is in a role of authority, that to question somebody's harshness or unkindness is viewed as a threat to that person's agency and right to, in fact, express their opinions. If every comment is a threat to agency, then none of us have any agency, because we're all constantly in either victim or offender mode. And a country cannot survive in that place, neither can an individual or a group or a church. When people are resorting to saying, it's my right, then they're obviously not in the place of knowing, of course you can say that, but that doesn't mean that you should, or that it's a good thing. And what you're seeing is the erosion of what I would call the essential goodness that underpins any society. And that it's that erosion that frankly has broken my heart in this country.
So we're in a situation where we are always at war, at least verbally, tribal.
Yeah, and you don't have to look very far in the world. Just look at Lebanon or Iraq or Afghanistan for pictures of what tribal countries look like. We don't want to be there. I don't want that for America. I don't want it for me or for my family or for anybody in this country or in this church or on this planet.
I don't want that either, David.
Yeah.
There was a quote I heard within the last week from Nikita Khrushchev, so going back to the 60s, where he took his shoe off and banged on a table. And I've forgotten exactly what happened, if it's after the Cuban Missile Crisis or what, but he said that something about the fact that we will destroy your country without even firing a shot.
Right.
Yeah, the version of the quote that I'm familiar with, he said, look, if or when, I don't know which word he used, America falls, it won't be from an external entity. It will be from within. And I don't want to be alarmist. I don't believe we're at that point now, but we've gone in that direction. And that's what we have to somehow stop and reverse slowly and carefully and painstakingly.
And what is our role in that? Right.
To listen,
Universal.
to think before we speak, and not to flame. I mean, what I refer to as the misuse of social media is the flaming, the attempt to project one's own internal shame onto other people, the demonization, all that, none of that. Can anyone here in this call imagine Christ doing that? Anybody? You can't. I mean, Christ's anger was reserved most strongly for those who misuse their power, people in high authority, not for you and me.
I noticed that. And now since you mentioned Christ in this whole equation, when I use Facebook, I'm careful of what I read and what I speak. And I use the baptismal covenant as my guide to what I post and everything, especially respect to everyone, the human dignity and stuff like that.
Let me ask on this Facebook social media thing. I'm somewhat familiar with it, but when somebody says, this is what I think, if you don't like it, unfriend me. Exactly what does that solve?
Nothing.
What does it solve when you tell somebody, just unfriend me? Doesn't that just lead to more and more of this kind of tribalization of the situation, more division within the country? Unfriend me if you don't like what I say, which is something like what Bailey was saying, I have the right to say what I want. If not, I'm leaving. Just exactly what are we solving when we say something like that?
I don't think anything's being solved.
Yeah, I think it makes it worse, sir.
I don't think it solves much.
Yeah.
I mean, when you unfriend somebody because they don't think like you do, or ask somebody to unfriend you because they don't think like you do, I don't think there's a whole heck of a lot of hope for us at this. It seems to me that this is what happens at the higher levels of government. They can't seem to agree or won't agree if it's light or dark outside. It causes just a massive problem that results in things like what happened on January 6th.
I have a question for Bailey. Did the man who left your church join another church, Bailey?
His wife did. He did not. He is angry at the church. At least the last time I spoke with him, which was months ago. But
so he's floating around without church.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I'm glad that you talked with him.
And that's the hard part of, and I would say this doesn't just apply to me as a leader of a of a community or an organization. I think it goes to some of the later questions in this, not to jump forward here, Courtney, but what's our role in this? I mean, the ultimate question of this course is, what is our role in this course? And it wasn't bothering me. If somebody doesn't like my sermon, that's fine. I usually will ask, okay, what do you not like about it? That's how I would have handled it if it had been, oh, Bailey preached this god awful sermon. One, it was directed to a person who's under my supervision and direction. But more than that, it is, you don't like something. That's your right to not like something. But you had to broadcast it out. And just like Dan, you're asking, what does this cause? All it did was create, I had the people who were, oh, what'd you say? What'd you say? I'm like, I didn't say anything. It wasn't my sermon. Or what did she say? And then you had people who were standing up for her and defending her. You had people standing up for this guy. Well, he has a right to say. And it's just, now it's, a conflict now becomes a four-alarm fire. And the thing with those kind of conflicts is they inevitably spread to, there's always collateral damage. People who were never involved in it from the first part are always affected by it. And the political discourse today is just collateral damage after collateral damage. As I said, the church simply is a microcosm.
To pick up, Bailey, on your comment about it becoming a four-alarm fire and tying that back into what Dan said earlier, what does it matter or what does it resolve if someone unfriends you because you don't like what they say? Well, what that does is that kind of leaves garbage in the room. That leaves stuff in there that's going to catch fire. So you're creating an environment that is going to become more inflammatory. How do you feel about compromise in areas that are important to you? And at what point do you find yourself resisting compromise? In other words, and that's kind of got a two-edged side to that question. Compromising on it, changing a position on something that you feel is very important after you've stated your position, but that implies you've even stated your position to start with. And kind of how I found myself responding over the last year is when I see and hear things that just innately twist my insides out, I don't say anything. I think it, but I don't say anything. And for me, that's kind of a compromise, right? Because I haven't taken any action. I haven't put it out there that I have a problem with it. Part of that reason I didn't say that because I was afraid of retribution. I was afraid of living by myself out here kind of in the country that if I put a sign out in front, I could have a problem.
Yes, I understand that.
Yeah.
Well, the thought that comes to mind is we're all making compromises in a sense all the time in society, and I mean, the example of this is, we all stop at red lights. It delays us, but it prevents nasty wrecks at the intersection. And that's kind of a trivial example, but there are many other things. And the question is what are we compromising? And I think part of what's infected the country is the fear that to compromise at all is to compromise your dignity. And that's what you can't compromise. Yeah, I mean, you can compromise on many things, but not on your rights as a human being, not to say whatever you want whenever you want, but to simply be a human being. And when that right is questioned, people get angry and defensive. And that's kind of where the country is. And I think it's a confusion over the notion that any compromise means a compromise of the most essential things that you can't compromise. So it's a question of knowing, I think, which is which. And that reality check is absent in much of the country now.
Thank you. I'm making some notes here.
Oh, thanks.
You know, the great senator from Tennessee, Howard Baker, always used to quote his father. And I forget the exact quote, but it was something like, you know, you should always assume the other guy is right. Go through life assuming the other guy is right. You can make the compromise from there. He might be right. He might not be right. Assuming that the other one is wrong just because he initially doesn't agree with you is probably not going to solve a lot of problems.
No, it won't.
I think a part of that, Dan, is be prepared to listen. And I try to do that. I'm not always successful, but be prepared to stop and listen. And it allows that to come out. Now, again, like Courtney said, it can be hard to act on that or to respond.
Yeah, it's hard because it seems like you can't even get to, can we talk about this anymore? It's just, you know, flat out, my way or the highway. We don't have an opportunity to dialogue because you've been unfriended before you knew it.
Kind of reminds me of a rather odd conversation I had with someone back in Halloween time. I asked an innocent question of what you gonna do with your pumpkin? Innocent enough question. I expected him to say make a pumpkin pie, make a jack-o'-lantern, something like that. And instead he was saying that he's going to throw the pumpkin at a liberal's house. Well, immediately I tried to back out of the conversation by saying that I'm not going to touch it. And he looked at me and said, are you a liberal? I did my best to keep cool, bag his groceries, wish him a good day and stuff like that. It seems like there's no compromise in the whole conversation.
Katie, I had a similar experience, and it seems to me there's no neutral ground. I had a similar experience with a person who's been our friend for 30 years, and we found ourselves in just places we can hardly communicate because everything kind of goes off the rails very quickly. We're not having any political discussions, but it isn't just that. I try to find neutral ground to have any communication that wouldn't have any political content. So I sent him an article, he's a pilot, about the plane that fell off, the wheel that fell off of a plane near Chicago and went into somebody's yard. And before it was over with, I got nasty letters back that said, well, they got the kind of plane wrong. That's just fake news, with all capital letters. And I thought it was just an article I thought you would be interested in. But it's kind of come to that. And I'm hoping that out of this series, we'll have some things to take with us when we begin to have things like that happen, because Chuck and I are just puzzled about what to do here. I don't know. I hope that, Courtney, you've seen the end of this. Will there be things we can leave with that we can, not just directives to listen or whatever, but will there be some things we can actively promote?
Well, to give you the bottom line up front, basically what the message is to rely on your faith and look inwardly on your own personal, unique manifestation of your faith in word and action. Put it in word and action to address. And there is no list given of you should do this, you shouldn't do that. And I think it's up to us to create that. So I think that that's something we can do together in our conversation. And what I'll do is I'll take what I heard today and start to use that to craft our list.
I'm thinking kind of about the things that Ray Suarez said. They really hit home for me, how we can share some of those things to think about.
I will publish a takeaway, basically, that is a summary of what he has said. And we'll use that. But in terms of a list of tools that you can use, we need to create that.
Would it help to share our feelings when somebody says something like that?
I think so. And I think something that's important in negotiation is finding common ground. But
I seem to remember in contact training that talking about feelings is really important, and reflecting the feelings of the other person and your own. I think there's a lot of these things are facts, and people don't want to have about facts anymore. A lot of stuff, climate change and fake news and so on and so forth. And so my own feeling is that, if I talk to my hair cutter and said, what you've just said makes me feel so sad, because that was the way I felt.
that's certainly something she should be able to relate to.
Yeah. So I'll have to think about that and pray about that, I think.
One thing that we can do, Teddy touched on it just a little while ago, but labeling everybody as conservative or liberal is not helpful.
No.
There are so many areas where we might be liberal in one thing. I'm using these words at face value. I don't even know what they mean. Might be liberal in one area and conservative in another area, social liberal, fiscal conservative, political moderate, whatever.
Don't forget progressive.
Yeah, and whatever. Progressive, yes, okay. And sooner or later, my opinion is we're all right in the middle somewhere. And by the time we average things out. So, labeling yourself or somebody as, a true conservative or a true liberal is probably not, and labeling somebody else the same way is probably not helpful. I got it. That's just my take on the situation. I just don't think it works.
Well, the thing about a label is that it's in that context, it's usually used for the purposes of dismissing the validity of the other person, which is itself the problem in this country.
Putting somebody on a defensive. Well, you're just a liberal. Yeah, so immediately you're put on the defensive, and no, that just doesn't work out.
I wasn't on the defensive for anything like that. I just did my best just to back out of the conversation.
I think that's all you can do at that point. Yeah.
But that's what it is. It's just backing out of the whole conversation.
Yeah. And how about the phrase, label jars, not people?
I love that phrase.
Label your toothbrush.
Yeah, label your books, not your people.
Well, and there's this old phrase, every person is an exception. So
Going to item number 4, question 4, is it essential that we try to remain as one people while we struggle through our differences?
I'd only say the future of the country depends on it. I mean, yes, absolutely.
I just going to say one resounding yes on that one.
Well, you take a look at some of our situations where they develop into riots, and on how many different flags do you see? I mean, the nation has like one flag, and there's like 75 of them that show up at these gatherings and riots, and that's just not helpful either. You can't remain as one when everybody's under a different banner. You just cannot do it.
Well, the thought that comes to mind is the phrase "e pluribus unum, which means
Yes.
really from many one. And you have to both honor the many because it's there. We all have differences, and somehow stay with the one. That is the challenge that I think we have in this country now.
Agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree with you on that one, David. I was just thinking about a similar thing while I was pushing carts in, was thinking about the E pluralism.
And the difficulty with that is the reason why that's hard is there is a tendency to want to ignore or brush over or dismiss differences. There are differences that are real, and yet there needs to be something in our hearts that binds us together. And that is what has been damaged so severely in the last several years. And that I think is what has to heal in us and in this country.
Yeah, and that's that makes me most fearful, because there was something on the Knoxville paper feed where someone responded with, "I don't want unity. I don't want unity. I hate you all. I want you gone." And when a body of folks are coming from that perspective, then the country's in trouble.
And the hope is that is a minority, that people with that extreme view. The hope is that is not a substantial fraction of the people.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I have seen that daily, of that type of attitude from people whom I meet day by day. So it may now be a minority, but I'm afraid that it is growing.
Well, it's very poisonous, and it's very potentially inflammatory, and it's important to work together and work with folks like that.
Yeah, Courtney, I share your concern about the fear factor of, if you speak, that there might be retribution of that. I think it certainly was sort of like that in the 60s and whatnot. And I'm alarmed that we're rolling back into that kind of a way of thinking, that people are intimidating folks because of their points of view.
Yeah, I think to build on that, Lola, and back to kind of what you asked earlier, I mean, what tools are we going to get to come out of this class? Yes, it's essential. We remain one, but it always has been a costly endeavor to try to maintain unity. And I think the cost is higher now. And a large part of that is, in order to be unified, is we have to be vulnerable. And the thing is, when you speak your mind, you're becoming vulnerable. And there are people who are not only going to dismiss what you say, but they're going to tell you you're a rotten, no good, fill in the blank, for even holding that opinion. As we enter into a season in the church where we talk about vulnerability, I mean, Holy Week, the reality of strength is found in our weakness. And I think there's this mindset. I mean, there's always been this mindset, but it seems to be becoming more authoritative now in the country, that might makes right. I'm going to project this strong image. I can't show any weakness. Certainly certain politicians have demonstrated this. You can't show any weakness because it's a sign that, my gosh, you may not be right on everything. Well, how horrible that would be. I think it was David who was talking earlier about, and I think both you and Ann were talking about, these are not easy answers. They're complex. And I can't really put my finger on why we are reverting back to wanting just easy answers for everything, other than on the surface, it makes it seem easy, but it doesn't. It's not easy. It doesn't make it easy. We have to offer something of ourselves to one another. And that's just where I see a significant portion of our country failing. And I see the temptation in myself, just to, won't say the word that just came to mind, but say, screw all of you. I'm going to go and do my thing. And the fact that I have those thoughts dealing with people from time to time says a little more understanding of where it comes from. And I have to fight my own temptations just to back off and disengage. So I'm going to get some bruises if I do.
There's a good word right there, Bailey. Disengaging. Sometimes that's what I was trying to do with that pumpkin conversation, was trying to disengage. But the thing is, Now that goes to my next question is, when is it appropriate to say what we need and when is it to keep silent?
I think we have to judge our audience. And what by judge, I don't mean judge in a moral sense, I mean assess. Know who we're speaking to and what the likelihood is of them being in a place where they can hear us. That would be my thought.
So it's situational, but it requires us to actively engage in that determination case by case. Certainly, we're in a covenant with God, following up on Bailey's sermon today, that it's a two-way covenant, and we have roles and responsibilities. We're stewards, and through God, all creation is ultimately connected, and all creation is equal. We have a responsibility to educate ourselves, to look for the truth, to discern the truth, and to uphold the truth. And part of that discernment is listening with our whole heart to find truths and answers that we seek. We want to lift any veils we've put over our own eyes and recognize what is untrue. We want to wholly surrender to God. We know God loves us unconditionally. We want to be obedient to that heavenly vision, to give our utmost for his highest, to quote Oswald Chambers. To give our utmost for his highest. God plants his saints in this whirlwind of life's storms. So let him plant us here and let us be obedient in the everyday details of our lives so that we can walk in the light of his vision and bear much fruit. Now, how that exactly translates into specific actions, we'll come up with a list that works for us. What I'd like to do is see if there are any final comments for today's session, and then we'll close with a prayer. I really, again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for your presence today and for your participation. Significant.
Let me just say, in our Senate right now, with an even split of 50-50, to me, this is just a wonderful opportunity for, finally maybe reaching to the other side instead of voting for whether you are an R or a D. It's just, now the question is, will they actually do that? Will they actually let go of their label to vote for what's best for the country? Okay, I'll give you my opinion. I don't have a lot of confidence in that, but it's just a great opportunity for them to do that. But in order for them to do that, I really do think we have to make our wishes known. If we don't talk to our representatives and senators, then we can squawk about them all we want, and they're just going to do whatever their label tells them to do. And of course, they got to worry about being censured by the state parties and this and that and whatever. But I don't know. I mean, they actually work for us.
Dan, I'm afraid as long as money and power are involved, our representatives are going to vote for where they're going to get a little bit piece of that power. And unfortunately, it's usually with those labels that you respected.
Yeah. I say I don't have a whole lot of confidence, but we have to nibble away at it, I think.
I was really shaken up yesterday or 2 days ago. A quote from our Senate Minority Leader: his job is to defeat the Democrats.
Yeah.
And it's not just the Democrats. I don't have much more faith in the Democratic leadership. Something nobody's mentioned is that there are real fundamental problems underlying what's going on. And there's real reason why these people are protesting so much. The wealth distribution is getting worse and worse.
Right. That's a big deal.
And we got to also realize there are real reasons why these things are happening. It's not just communication.
Right.
I'll say something I'll get in trouble with, but our economic system is based on a winner take all.
You're not going to get into trouble in my book.
Some modification of that is absolutely essential. And it's hard to see any sign.
Well, that winner take all mentality is what we're seeing manifested in the political discourse.
All discourse.
Yes.
Except when I say something, then.
I wasn't going to mention that.
So I saw a good cartoon. They would go out on a little lighter note, and it had a couple watching television, and the news was on. And she's saying to him, he's seated on the couch, "Now, which party did they say? I need to be able to judge my outrage."
Yeah.
Who did it? It doesn't matter. We're outraged if it's them and not if it's us.
Okay, well, we'll continue next week. Same bat channel, same bat time. Bailey, could you
Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you, Courtney.
have one more?
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
We're going to go out on a prayer. Bailey, could you flip us to the next slide, please? This is, again, in the back of the prayer book, the Thanksgiving for our nation. And I'd like to ask someone else to read, it's actually just to go around the room, one person or one couple read the long part, and then together we say what's in italics that's bold, okay? So David and Anna, I'll let you read the first one.
Okay.
Almighty God,
Giver of all good things, we thank you for the natural majesty and beauty of this land. What's the next phrase? It's blocked on my screen.
They restore us.
They restore
us.
We often
But
destroy them.
Though we all
often destroy them.
Yeah.
Heal us.
Heal us.
Heal us.
Okay, Barb and Brian.
We thank you for the great resources of this nation. They make us rich,
though
we often exploit them.
Forgive us.
Betsy.
We thank you for the men and women who have made this country strong. They are models for us, though we often fall short of them.
Inspire us.
Eddie.
We thank you for the torch of liberty which has been lit in this land. It has drawn people from every nation, though we have often hidden from its light. Enlighten us.
Mary Kaiser.
We thank you for the faith we have inherited in all its rich variety. It sustains our life, though we have been faithless again and again.
Renew us.
And then everyone together. Help us.
Help us,
O
O
Lord,
Lord,
to finish the good work that we've done. Strengthen our efforts
to blot out
ignorance and
prejudice and
to abolish
poverty and crime.
And
hasten the day
when
all our people
with many voices
and
one united chorus
will
glorify your holy name.
Amen.
See you next week, everybody.